this, and this is my video over, I kind of talked about the Affliction show, so I thought I would come on here and talk about it afterwards and talk about the fact that this past weekend was probably one of the biggest weekends, I would argue, MMA has ever had, with the one exception being probably the Elite XC fight, as this weekend definitely brought a lot of media attention towards MMA, where I think the Elite XC, when the Elite XC was on CBS, it wasn't all good. I think this was a much more positive, everything I've read as far as mainstream stuff that has been written about it. So I think that was good. I will, for those of you that did not see the Affliction show, I would say go watch it. There are at least 3 fights on there that I thought were good in different ways. The Fedor fight is just an awesome ponage of him just destroying somebody, which much in the same way Mike Tyson used to destroy people, though it's a bit more interesting because it wasn't like a guy running from him. It was just him, just the bell rang and he just pounced. Then you have the 2 other fights which had 2 pretty good knockouts. The undercard was a long undercard, though I didn't think there was anything totally horrible on it, but there was nothing really great. I mean, this was definitely geared more towards the heavyweights, and either you're going to like heavyweights or you're not. A lot of people, heavyweights are slow and prodding, and they get gassed, and that's all true due to the fact that they're heavyweights. But if you follow boxing, if you follow MMA, people like heavyweights. It's just the way it is. People have a thing about heavyweights. Heavyweight fights always seem to have a bigger event feel to them. And one thing the Affliction show definitely had was it felt like an event. Not good production values, to be honest. The production probably had a lot to be garnered for, though I think that they will improve that on the next show. Apparently they are going to have a show in November. It would either be that they're looking for Fedor versus Randy, of course. I would love to see that. I don't think we'll probably see that. So we'll probably have Federer versus somebody else, and they definitely have a few guys that they can pick. Particularly, I can't even pronounce his name, but the other Russian that was on there, I think, had his name here, I think, right? Arlovsky. I see. I can never pronounce his name. Even when I read it, I can't pronounce it. So I'm not even gonna. There we go. He definitely was the one of old. I would say Andre was definitely looked like he was like he used to be, in a very impressive win. And there's a lot of talk that you could put both of them together, put them in Chicago, which has a pretty good Russian population, and it would have a very big gate. While I'm doing this, I did this video yesterday, except that YouTube started doing their maintenance, and so I wasn't able to upload it. By the time I had gone to sleep, so that is why this is a little late. But I would definitely say it was a good show. I think the UFC show was a good, for free TV show as well, with something a little bit for everybody. Sylvia basically destroyed his guy pretty quickly, which was kind of cool. But a lot of the other stuff was just blah, your basic UFC stuff, where it was okay. I think most people who've seen both shows definitely felt, and I've heard people that have also seen the Dream show, which happened this weekend as well, that the UFC show, not too surprisingly because it was kind of thrown together, was the weakest of the 3. But definitely after the Pride show, and I've talked to a couple of friends of mine who were, because I had to work that night, so I watched it from home, but I had a couple of friends who, even here in Houston, went to a couple of bars, and they watched it. And the thing is the UFC show ended before the Pride show, listen to me, the Affliction show. The Affliction show looked very much like a Pride show in production, not production quality, but the way they did things. They had a lot of entertainment factors, which I think, just to kind of get off on a little rant, which I think works. As much as people love to, hate on that, they didn't like that about the Elite XC show, but it sells, and as much as people don't want to admit that, it does sell, and I think it's good, and it gives it an event type feel. The Megadeth stuff, which I didn't think was going to come off very well, the way they used it was actually very good, and I think it came off. And from the live reports I've read from the guys that were there, um, they thought it came off very well and was a nice little change of pace, particularly during the fact that this was a long show. So you had that, but where was I going? Anyways, the UFC show definitely came off, not quite as good, but I think that's to be expected. It was a free show and it was kind of thrown together. But definitely, after that show, after the Affliction show, which I must say, after I watched it, I was very geeked, and then I watched the UFC show, and I was even more geeked because it was good. It was just a good, and you got this feeling. I mean, if you went to Sherdog after the oh, that's what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about the bars, but I had two buddies. Back to my point. Who, well, actually, a couple buddies of mine who, with their friends, went to a couple bars to watch this, and they said that the UFC show ended first, and so all the people that were there to watch the UFC show, and then you had the people there watching the Pride show, all turned and started watching, or the Pride. Listen to me, I said Pride again. The Affliction show. As I said, it was very much like a Pride show in the way that it looked, and just reminded me of a Pride show. But anyways, the Affliction show. And started watching it, and a lot of them, a lot of people had said, oh, that show's not going to be very good, I think it's overhyped, and they all said that, everyone was cheering by the end, everyone really seemed to like it. A lot of people had said they would definitely watch it again, and I think that even though, and some of the money stuff came out today, and they're definitely going to lose money, but I said that before, they're definitely going to lose money on this show. It'll be interesting to see how much, if they're able to at least, how close they can come to break even. I would recommend myself, and not that they're going to listen to me or hear me or anything, but that they get a DVD of this show out ASAP, because there is such a vibe and such a lot of talk about this show that I think they could make up at least some of their money probably back up doing it with that, with DVD sales. But if you went to Sherdog after the events, Sherdog, their server crashed. There were so many hits. You had, for at least a little while, both Affliction and UFC were on the main page and the main headline on ESPN.com. That's a pretty big deal. There was a lot of talk about the shows, and I think that for what Dana and UFC were trying to do going up against Affliction, I do think it backfired, because I think that more people started paying attention to the Affliction show and heard about the Affliction show because of that. Dave Metzler from the Wrestling Observer, when he said that he looked around and it was very much like the NFL. The people that normally follow the NFL were basically sent to follow the XFL, and a lot of ways that's how he kind of felt about it. There were a lot of people at that show, though. They apparently had paid about over 10,000 people paid. That's pretty good, I would say, for a first show. It wasn't a complete sellout. There were about 700 tickets away from being a complete sellout, but I think for a first show they did pretty well. And he said that in the arena, though it didn't come across well on television, due to the mics and the production stuff, which they do need to improve on the production stuff, I would definitely say. And also the commentating, I think, needs to be a little better, though. Everyone seems to not like the commentating for various reasons. I'm one of those people that fall in the line with the fact that the commentating of the show was good. Was the one thing I liked was actually Big John. I thought he did actually a pretty good job, and I also like the fact that the commentators, because the Affliction show, they used a ring, and a very large ring, probably too big of a ring. That was one of the big gripes. Though I wouldn't be surprised if people kind of start griping and they use a cage, which I think would be a mistake, because if they do more shows, and apparently they are going to at least do one more show, that they keep a ring, because I think it does give them some individuality and separates them a bit. And also there is that illusion, I've heard people say this before, that when this stuff takes place in a ring, even though with the ring there are issues with guys going through ropes, and this happened at this show a couple times, that people have this weird misconception that it looks a bit more legit, I guess, and not human cockfighting, which I don't agree with that at all, of course. But my point was that they explained the difference between a cage and a ring, the benefits of a ring, the benefits of a cage, the how fighters have to fight differently, how certain fighters it benefits, both ways. So it was good, and I thought they did a pretty good job of explaining that. Again, I don't think very highly of any MMA commentators, to be honest, because I don't think they do a good enough job of explaining what's going on during a match, explaining what guys are trying to do. It's always been my biggest gripe with MMA stuff. But a lot of people definitely, I think this weekend, even though UFC, I think, ultimately made a mistake because there was far more media. There's been lots of reports. There was far more media at the Affliction show than there was at the UFC show, which is going to happen, I guess, even with UFC being in Vegas. But definitely, I think backfired in some ways. But I think it was good for MMA because it definitely brought a lot of attention to the sport for a weekend. And it wasn't like the Elite XC show, which did bring some negative connotations to the sport as a whole, even though I think that if that show had not had the eye poke of doom, I think we would be probably talking about the fact that it was a very good show, and definitely, and if you people that followed that definitely had kind of an eye opener because it was definitely a big success. They're going to do another one this week, which I'm looking forward to. Probably won't be as good because the card just isn't as good. It doesn't have that star power, so I don't think, and there hasn't been a lot of production or a lot of ad time for it. And that might just be because they know it's probably not going to do very well because there's not anything to really build around. But overall, I thought this was a huge successful weekend for MMA in general. Um, we saw Fedor, I think definitely, before a lot of people didn't know who he was. Now, a lot of people are talking about Fedor. He definitely had the type of showing he needed to, which was very interesting. And overall, I think the Affliction show was a big success, and I think in retrospect, I think UFC made a huge mistake. I think going against them, I think if they had not gone against them, I don't think people would have been as such aware, except for the diehard MMA guys, about the Affliction card. And then once the Affliction card, so people would not have seen it. I think there would still probably be some buzz about it because it ended up being pretty good. But the fact that they did deliver, which was big, and they delivered with heavyweights, which is something boxing does not do and has not done, because you have a lot of stuff going on. But like I said, people like heavyweights, and I know there are a lot of diehard MMA guys, just like me. I love boxing, and anyone will tell you that usually you're going to get the better fights in the lighter weight classes. But there's something about a heavyweight match which is unique in and of itself and is more of an event. And I think that's one thing UFC has not really realized, or they always say, oh well, the light heavyweights is our key division, but I think a lot of that was just them selling it because they didn't have the top heavyweights at the time, and they knew it, and so they couldn't really go after that, and people would probably call them on it because people were aware of Pride at the time. So I hopefully, and this is the hopefully, I would love to actually see this. UFC do more of this. I would love to see UFC do more major counter programming against Elite XC, Affliction, whoever, maybe even Strikeforce. Though Strikeforce is Strikeforce, and no one probably not going to pay too much attention to it. But I thought it was a pretty overall. Like I said, I think the weekend was a huge success for MMA in general. I think that was definitely the case. And, I'm really hoping that Affliction is able to stick around. I really liked the show. It had its problems, but I think that was to be expected given this was their first show. And a lot of people say, oh, but even though it was their first show, well, no matter what, when you have a first show, things are going to happen, and you're going to learn from the mistakes. They're definitely, again, they're probably I would say it's probably 90% that they're going to have a show in November, which I'll buy. And I think if anybody, hopefully they can, like I said, if I was them, I would get the DVD out ASAP, because I think if people saw the DVD, they would go, wow, this is the type of show that I want to see, and it would probably do better the second time around, I think. And I think most people feel that way because the show was very good, and it just had an aura about it, which I think UFC often misses out on, because I think UFC sometimes listens too much to the diehard fans, and they have forgotten that you do have to add a little bit of entertainment. You know, put the entertainment around the matches, and then let the matches take care of themselves. Boxing sometimes does this, and boxing fans often, don't like that. And I think you have a lot. I've said this before. MMA often compares itself to boxing and says, well, we have to do what boxing does, because boxing is seen as a legit sport more than us. And I think that that's a mistake. I think that you have to differentiate yourself from boxing and say, hey, we're not boxing. We're going to do the things boxing should be doing. And I think one of that is, entertaining entrances. The live band that we saw at Affliction with Megadeth. I think it worked, and I think it added something to it. They did the whole Pride, the guys coming out. That's not gonna, guys coming out on the walkway for the intro to the start, and that's not gonna work in a U.S. environment. But I definitely think that this was, like I said, I think overall this was a good weekend. Like I said, I thought the UFC show was good for a free TV show. So I will say this about the UFC stuff when it comes to that, is that I would love for them to put on more pay-per-view-esque fight nights for the free television, and maybe do away with a few pay-per-views so that the pay-per-views would be a bit more special. Just like I don't think that I think they need to not do what boxing does. I think they also need to look, because when it comes to the pay-per-view stuff, they're definitely using wrestling's model. Pro wrestling's model, and I think that they need to learn from pro wrestling, because one of the things that a lot of people who have watched pro wrestling for a long time feel that there's a saturation because there's too many pay-per-views. And I think UFC, even though it's hard to tell them, don't make that pay-per-view money, because that pay-per-view money is so much more, and they're definitely gonna, you make more money from pay-per. I know that sounds very odd, but they're gonna make more money from pay-per-views than they would it being on Spike. If they could get, a network deal, which I don't think they'll ever get, because a network is never going to give them what they want, unfortunately. So I don't think you'll ever see that, like a major network. So to that extent, I think that you have to look at. I think if they could put on 4 of them, do away with 4 pay-per-views. Ultimately, I think it would help them. And more of, I think would help them in the long run. It would help them with more, with more people being able to see the shows, seeing the major fights, and in the long run would help them. It wouldn't help them in the short run. Sometimes I think you have to take a step backwards to take a step forwards. It definitely would kind of be a step backwards money-wise, but I think ultimately it would help. And it's one of those things that I think they could learn from pro wrestling and pro wrestling's mistake, because I definitely think, particularly with MMA, I think 12 pay-per-views, particularly when you can't put on, one fight pay-per-views should, in my opinion, be on television when it comes to UFC, because often, the undercards are just not that they're not good, but they're very lackluster, I think, because, like I said, UFC doesn't do enough job of making an event seem like an event, and that was one thing that I think everyone I've talked to about the Affliction card really felt, that it felt like an event. So that's one thing I would love to see UFC do, and I think I'm not the only person to say that. Financially, they probably would never do it, because again, their pay-per-view, they'd be losing out on that pay-per-view money, and they're going to make more on pay-per-view anyways. I would say this though, I think if Affliction, it would be interesting to see if Affliction could get. I don't think they would want to do it with the neck. If it was Fedor and Randy, I don't think. I definitely don't think you would want to do that on free television. But if they could take the hype that came out of this event and translate that and get a show on free television, and then have Andre and Fedor, even though, you're risking Fedor losing to Andre, but I think you do that and you put that on free television, and you gamble a little bit and you hope Fedor wins. That would be, I think, a big freaking deal. They put the 2 shows on FSN. It'd be interesting, particularly if the Elite XC, the next Elite XC show does well, that if Fox doesn't go to to them and say, hey, why don't we have 2-3 hours on Fox and see how this works. And I think that would help the sport so much it would not even be funny. And I also think if they could, I think that would be very interesting. And I think that's dreaming in a lot of ways, but I definitely think that would be interesting. But again, I think I'm talking a lot about the Affliction card because it really, really impressed me. Particularly since I was expecting, worst case scenario, and I didn't get worst case scenario, so that was pretty pleasant in my view. But it'd be very interesting to see that. But like I said, if I was Affliction, I'd be getting the DVD out ASAP, just to get even more hype around it, just so people can see it. Because I definitely think the show had a little bit of for everybody, particularly the last 3 fights. I think I think everybody could pretty much see a lot of that. So I think that was good. I think it was an entertaining show, and I think it was a good show. I think it was the type of show we haven't seen in a long time. I've heard the only people I've really heard knock it are people that definitely are not fans of heavyweights. But and the production values, because the production values weren't good. I'm not gonna lie about that. They were not up to par. Um, but I think they can definitely learn from this going forward. Be interesting to see what the next one is. I think that's the one where you really judge them on a lot of things, and hopefully they can tighten things up maybe a little bit, make some more money. Like I said, if there was any way they could get on television, particularly with the hype that's coming out of this, I think that would be very good for MMA, because you would definitely have I think you would have somebody, even with all the cross promotion that apparently is going to maybe start going on, which I think would be kind of cool. You would definitely have someone that could at least look, kind of make UFC kind of look over their back a little bit, which is something they haven't really had since Pride went under. I mean, you have K1 and K1, but K1's kickboxing, so it's not really the same. But I mean, that's it. In a lot of ways, that's their biggest competitor, and one of the reasons why they do stay away from Japan, which I think is unfortunate, because I think that hurts the sport a lot, because I definitely think they need to do better at getting into Japan. But that's another rant for another time. I just wanted to come on here and talk about this because this was definitely a great weekend for MMA. And again, I would recommend, if there's any way you could see all 3 shows, because even though I haven't seen the Dream show yet, I've heard it was good. So I definitely think if you're an MMA fan, that's wonderful to hear. On something about the Dream stuff that I would like, and I think Elite XC or Affliction or somebody, even Strikeforce, to a lesser degree, if they could come along and put on a tournament, a year-round tournament, where you would start, have it go over 4 pay-per-views, have it year-round. Don't do like we often see in Japan, where you have the last fight, the semifinals and the finals be the same night. I wouldn't do that. I would just, because that way, if a guy does get hurt, you're not having to rely on substitutions and other things like that, and I don't think you would get an athletic commission to okay 2 fights in one night, for guys anyways, particularly where you'd want to have the finals. But I think if you could have a tournament like that, particularly with, like, let's say the less popular divisions, particularly like for UFC, even in UFC, I think in the less popular divisions, I think that would, and in UFC, I think it would fill up a lot of those pay-per-views. I talked about the fact that I think they have too many pay-per-views, and so you have a tendency to have lackluster or just okay pay-per-views. I think if you could fill, because UFC could probably put on 2 tournaments at the same time, running, simultaneously. You start one pay-per-view. You start one during one pay-per-view. Maybe have some of the opening bouts on free television, and then do the same on another division, and just go from there and have a year-round tournament, because people like tournaments, even if it's a prolonged tournament like that. I think people still like it. I think they like the idea of it, because I think they feel like guys are getting their chances. You're giving guys chance to prove what they can in the ring, and I think it would sell, and I think it would be one of those things where you often hear people talk about that's something people would like to see in boxing, because they feel like it would give guys who you don't normally know a stage to show what they can do. And I definitely think that would be an interesting concept, and I would love to see that. That's one thing I really like about Dream, is that they seem pretty adamant about putting on these tournaments. And even though I'm not big on the, the 2 fights in one night thing, I wasn't even big on it with Pride, to be honest. Even though I love Pride, so I definitely, that's one last thing I would add. I've rambled on for a very long time. Again, I think this was an awesome night, or an awesome weekend for UFC. Lots of good coverage, good positive coverage. That was the big thing. They had good positive coverage, and I think that's a great thing. And hopefully, MMA can kind of build towards this. It's now in Elite XC's court to see what they can do. Hopefully, they can deliver. Like I said, I don't expect I don't expect a show that's going to probably be as popular or do as well as the first one, because you don't have anything marquee on it, but to like casual fans. But I definitely think it'll be interesting to check out. But anyways, that's all. I've rambled for far too long. It's a long ass video. But for all of you that have watched, I thank you. Later. Have a good one. I'm out.